Researchers at Massey University have released figures they say Kiwis will need to save to get by in retirement. They say to achieve a no-frills retirement, a couple in the regions will need to save $77,000, with that figure jumping to $191,000 if they live in the city. If you want to have a bit more freedom to eat out or take a holiday, the experts suggest the numbers are more like this: a choices retirement, $480,000 in the regions and $755,000 in the city. However, the living costs and inflation rising at alarming rates, there's a worry that even those figures might not be enough. Massey University business professor Claire Matthews joins us for the latest on their research this morning. Claire, thanks for being with us. So the numbers we saw there, for what length of time would that sustain a couple in retirement?
So we do the figures based on a retirement starting at age 65 and going through to age 90. So some people obviously won't need to save or cover a retirement of that long. Others will need to cover for longer. So it's kind of taking something in the midpoint. So 25 years worth of retirement.
What does a no-frills retirement look like? So that would be a minimum of $77,000 in the regions, $191,000 in the city, but no frills. What does that mean?
So no frills means it's topping up New Zealand super. So we know that some people get by in retirement on New Zealand super alone, but for most of us, something on top of that is what we're looking for. No frills doesn't mean that there's a lot of fancy stuff in there, but you may have some limited choices, and you can do some of those other recreational things, some slightly more expensive things that you might want to do. But you're not going to be going out for meals at restaurants very often. You're not likely to be doing a lot of travelling. It's more likely a retirement, probably at home, doing stuff in your garden, getting involved in community activities.
And so then the choices, the freedom, which were the numbers, 480,000 in the regions, 755,000 in the city, that allows you to travel, to eat out. What kind of luxuries does that afford?
It depends what luxuries you want to an extent, but the point is that it does allow you to have choices, as the name suggests. It's useful to remember that those are for couples, so it's not one person trying to save those amounts, it's two people, so that makes it a little bit easier. But it does mean that you've got those choices. You can buy more expensive cuts of meat, you can buy fancier foods, you can eat out, you can go to the movies, you can do some travel, you can do the things that possibly cost a little bit more money because you've got a little bit more money available to do those things.
And what is the difference between this amount that you say you would need in retirement and what you get through super? How much more are you needing to save?
Well, this is the amount that you need to save to provide for the spending in addition to New Zealand super. So it takes into account that you're already getting New Zealand super, and then to provide the level of expenditure that our choices households are spending, this is how much you need to save on top of your New Zealand super.
And how long are these figures relevant for? Because, of course, they, I guess, change depending on cost of goods, on inflation. How long is this relevant for?
So we update the figures on an annual basis, and then every 3 years, because the Statistics New Zealand update their household economic survey that we use as the basis of this every 3 years, we update it to reflect changes in spending patterns. So this year we've just done an inflation adjustment, and so there's been quite a substantial inflation adjustment because it was for the 12 months to June, which had a 7.3% CPI. So we saw quite a high inflation. We would hope that the Reserve Bank is going to get that under control, and we'll see it coming back to the 2% that we've had in recent times, because that's what we need, not just for retirees, but also in terms of planning for retirement and just having that certainty, a greater level of certainty around costs, etc. We need to see the Reserve Bank getting inflation back under control.
OK, so there's been a huge rise. The rise might continue to increase, but at a slightly more marginal level. What are the big contributors to this rise in costs? What is costing more for people in retirement?
Well, for the retired households, what we find is that there are basically 4 categories. Transport is the biggest one, and that's partly because it's a substantial portion of their expenditure, but also because it had a very high inflation rate for the 12 months to June. Housing and household costs, household utilities is another category. Food, because of course it's a substantial item, even though inflation was not as high as some of the others, the fact that it's a substantial part of their expenditure. And then for our choices households, it's recreation and culture expenditure that's tended to make quite a significant impact this year.
It's really interesting, the work that you've done. Claire, it's Ryan here. Thanks for coming on the show. Have you factored in that the retirement age will get the pension from the age of 65?
Yes, so the assumption is that you get the pension at 65, and then you need to look at whether you want to live on the New Zealand super alone or whether you want to have additional expenditure. Right. And for most of us, we want additional expenditure.
Oh, we absolutely do, in an ideal world, of course. But so should people really be thinking about, you know, when you look at government policy, you look at debt and you look at the affordability of the super scheme in the long term, should people really be relying on, one, that age being 65, and two, all of the current payments and entitlements being there when we get there?
Well, that's always an interesting question. So personally, I actually think that the age of entitlement should go up to 67, but it needs to be phased in over a considerable amount of time. Last time we had an increase, it was done over a very short period of time, and that had quite a negative impact for people because they suddenly found that they were going to be unable to get the New Zealand super for 5 years later than they're expected, with not a lot of time to prepare. I'd like to see us increasing it to 67. It's unfortunate it didn't happen. You know, the announcement didn't happen 10 years ago. But when it does happen, it needs to be phased in over a long period of time so that people have got time to prepare for that and they're not significantly impacted. So I would like to see the age of eligibility increase. The political parties are all saying they won't do that. So who knows what will actually happen. In terms of the actual amounts, that's legislated and it's a good level of income. We don't have a lot of retired people in poverty, so I think it would be a very foolhardy government that made any changes to the actual level of New Zealand super or took away the general eligibility for it. It's a really important part of our supporting for our retirees, and I think it's suitable to keep going. The other option would be to bring in means testing, and that comes with a whole lot of complications and actually can be worse and doesn't actually give the advantages.
That was Massey University's business professor Claire Matthews with the latest retirement expenditure guidelines. Thanks very much for joining us, Claire.